Hi everyone, I am your host, Jade Haggard, podcasting from Art Universe Laboratory. Welcome to Artist Solace. Welcome everyone, and thanks again for listening. Here is episode 20 of Artist Solace. Welcome to the last episode for this year/season. I want to start off by saying thank you to everyone who participated in this and agreed to be on the show through the awkward times and the truly moving times. I've had an incredible year in general, and your inspiration, insight, and advice helped make it a hell of a lot better. You know who you are. This podcast wouldn't exist without you. So thanks again. I truly appreciate you. I close the season out this week with Dan Cooper of Indianapolis, Indiana. Dan is a visual artist, photographer, entrepreneur, teacher, scientist, among other things. We talk about the history of the Indianapolis art scene, his interests and experience in religion, science, mental health, sports, travel, and leadership. This dude has a ton of experience with various things and is a really interesting guy. I hope you stay tuned to find out more about his life and what his most important advice is for artists. You can find out more about him online at cooperfineart.com. Thanks, Dan, for coming on. We are here at Art Universe Laboratory. Joining me today is Dan Cooper of Indianapolis, Indiana. Dan is a full-time visual artist, and today we're going to talk about what his journey has been like pursuing his art and see if we can extract some inspiration from him. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Jade. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Did you find the house okay?
Drove right to it. Of course,
good.
I use Google Maps, so just made it real easy.
It's a very nice tool we have.
And I've had a lot of experience being around the neighborhood with University.
It's okay.
UUI, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Indianapolis.
That's what you were trying to say.
Yeah,
now I understand.
Really. Because I'm also thinking about being Butler so close, because I've been there a lot over the years, and Clues Hall, and many times I come right by here to get to those places. And CTS, Christian Theological Seminary.
You are involved with all of those things? The Universal Unitarian, I don't know.
Unitarian Universalist Church of Indianapolis. We've had several shows there. In fact, the first time we ever gave a sermon was there, just a little over a year ago, when the Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts alumni, which we'll be talking about, practically church took over the church and provided 2 sermons and workshops and visual art on the walls and original music.
You gave a sermon?
Yeah, really. I know. It's pretty weird. I'm not anything... Of course, being at the Unitarian Church made it a lot easier.
What does Unitarian mean?
I'm not a Unitarian. I'm a Methodist.
Okay.
But you basically, no matter what your faith belief system is, you're welcome there. And they're very action-oriented.
Especially prefix una.
With social programs and the politics behind it. So they're a very active church, and a lot of artists know about them because they've got fantastic... the church was built, the sanctuary is built to display art. So every month there's rotating shows that go on there.
Oh, I went there one time. They hold an open mic.
Yeah, because they have music there a lot.
The weekend after Thanksgiving. I went there like once in 2012 and tried playing the banjo. That was about it. Otherwise, I've lived near it for, what the hell year is it? 5 years now? 5 years now? So.
Yep, so a lot going on around here.
Yeah, a lot. And this is a good location.
And
I like this spot.
CTS was a host many times for many years for classes and for the performances and exhibitions for each classes of the religion, spirituality, and the arts program. would take place there.
Religion, spirituality, and
religion,
the arts
spirituality, and the arts.
I think that has been mentioned twice on this podcast.
Really?
It was Becky Archibald. And,
yeah,
Mark
she's a musician.
Keeling. Do you know those two?
Yeah, they're alumni of the program.
They were on the podcast too.
Yep, how about that? So each year there's 12 new artists that are selected from all different kinds of disciplines. So among 12, there's visual artists and writers and musicians. We've had a dancer, and just about all the different disciplines have been represented at one time or another. And during that class, that's directed by Rabbi Sandy Sasso, who started the whole thing, study a section, a story in Genesis. And there's experts from all different fields, from literature and music and the visual arts and the theology, history, sometimes even science, to really look at a topic, and then so that you know so much about it and you can create new art, which is really a long tradition in all disciplines from way back. Is a lot of art has always been religious and spiritually oriented. There's a lot of art being done today that hasn't been done historically as much, dealing with subjects like transformation.
Yeah.
But we've talked about all the way from Abraham sacrificing Isaac, Adam and Eve, the creation story, Cain and Abel, Jacob's dream, and the next one that starts this week, a new class, is tackling Jonah.
Okay,
the Jonah and the whale story.
That one I'm not really familiar with.
And Lot's wife, too, was real interesting, because some of these stories are some of the shortest in the Bible.
Yeah, I hear like Cain and Abel's like 10 sentences or something, like 10 lines.
The big thing is looking at the midrash of that, which is the stories behind the stories of what could have been, what might have been like, can really be discussed, and how does those old stories relate to modern day life. So it can make things. It's like the Torah, the original 5 books of that Christians use as the Bible. In a lot of ways, it's like a Rorschach of human psychology. That all those things that are described, it's like the dark aspects of people, and almost everything that can go wrong are talked about. And here's a way to live a life to, get beyond that. That's where I like the New Testament is, okay, here's everything that was really wrong with everybody, and here's the New Testament. Here's a guide to how to live a perfect life. Of course, nobody can be perfect, so that makes it kind of frustrating too. So it's been real interesting, as so many of us has been 72 artists who have gone through it now.
And you are in that program right now?
I was fortunate to be in the very first class.
Okay.
And we all decided, the 12 of us, that we wanted to talk among ourselves more than the class time allowed, and started meeting separately. And before the last class was done, even, we had decided that we wanted to continue meeting and learning together. And Rabbi Sandy Sasso said, yeah, if you want to keep getting together, I'll go along for the ride, which led us to doing a Spirit and Place festival event. As far as I know, it's the largest event that's ever been in the Arts Garden. We had the Arts Council, the first time that they partnered for a Spirit and Place event. And we had... we had like 24 artists, so it's going to be hard to remember everybody. But Pam Blevins-Hinkle, who is the director of Spirit and Place, was in our class. And she's the one that gave us the idea that Dream was going to be the theme that year. And so that led us, let's do Jacob's Dreams. It was kind of like a logical progression after doing Abraham and Isaac. And We follow the same format, but independently from the Butler program, which at that time it was Butler University. As of last year, it's now part of IUPUI and IE's.
Sorry about that. Should have silenced my phone.
IUPUI's Arts and Humanities Institute. So we had
Okay, say that again. So
it's part of IUP currently the RSA program, Religion, Spirituality, and Arts. I'll start saying RSA now because this is a lot of letters. IUPUI's Arts and Humanities Institute. Right. So by then there was a second class that joined us in time to plan this big event. Sophia Engel did. I asked to do an installation that would fill up the Arts Garden. For those of you who have been in the Arts Garden, you know how massive that is. She started working months in advance, having the public help paint these transparent sheets of plastic and painting on translucent materials. And Dr. Dawn Batson had arranged for the Indiana State University steel drum band to come into Indianapolis and play her original steel drum piece. Now, Roger Rowe, who is an oboist with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, provided improvisational music behind the poets. We didn't have a stage. We had just everybody was all over the place. A steel drum band in one corner, and the piano and flute playing in another, and poets from upstairs, and so we had a lot going on. WFYI filmed it for us, so that was great.
Wow.
They were an original sponsor of the first year's program.
Okay.
And I knew that when their involvement was going to end at that last performance of that class, that I decided I was going to pick it up and make a documentary about this process that we'd all been going through, because it turns out nothing's been done like it anywhere else in the world, where artists of different disciplines come together to study a topic and then create new art. There's been classes and opportunities where usually artists of the same discipline, like painters doing things like with musicians, or writers studying together, but everybody coming together it turns out is pretty unique. So whenever we've done a show, it's like the first time anything like that's ever been done.
Now, which other disciplines were involved? Say, for example, the first class you were in.
We had
what did you have?
Painters,
writers,
storyteller, musicians, and a dancer. So we had poetry, music of all kinds, and plenty of art. Now, we also incorporated the audience and the fact that if you know the Arts Garden, there's all the little tables are sitting around. Mm-hmm. We did not have a stage. We incorporated all around. So the visitors and the guests, the audience, people walking through, became part of the performance. They were all, because it was interactive to begin with people having the opportunity to draw their dreams with oil pastels on a huge roll of roofing tar paper, which grips the oils really well. And those are held up in kind of a nice Torah-shaped scroll that we could wind up from both ends to keep the roll going as it filled up with drawings. Ray Marquette had a dream tree. It was a beautiful installation piece that people could write their dreams. He was in particular concerned about gun violence and people's dreams about how to deal with that, and hang it from the trees. So
like actual really cool. Like literal actual dreams or ambitions.
I didn't say.
You didn't say.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
mystery.
Yeah, just how you can define dream your own way. So having that show was pretty cool. A year later, we did another show, and we had more artists to draw from. more music and more
So the
paintings.
music now, is everybody making paintings, or are the musicians making music?
Musicians are
dancers?
making music.
Okay.
Yep. The poets
In
are making
response
poets to their studies.
In response to one story you guys are
Right.
all
From
reading?
that list I gave you, like Cain and Abel, for instance. I got to collaborate with Rabbi Sasso on a video that we both, she had written a poem based on Cain and Abel as kids. And I was wanting to do a video, art video based on Cain and Abel as kids. And at the class where we're announcing, you know, we're kind of like, here's what we're planning on doing. I said, you know, I really would like to collaborate with somebody. And that's where Rabbi Sasso was real quick. Oh, I've got a poem, you know, it's just on that same thing. Can I be part of it? So it's like, of course.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? And so we did a really cool video for that. So we followed up the Arts Garden show with a show at Clues Hall. And in some ways it was bigger. We had more visual artists at that point. And we had Gabrielle Serberville add some new music to what Dr. Don Batson had done. And the stories that we've done are in Genesis were really dark stories. And so especially a lot of the poets, some of the art really take kind of a dark turn.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do a show where it was all like, oh, here's these pretty paintings on the wall, you know, isn't this all nice? I wanted to get darker than that. So with the poems and the music we had, I decided to create an atmosphere of chaos and confusion, which was incorporated with the use of music volume going up and down at designated times and forcing the people reciting their stories and poems to move around at different times to 5 different sets that weren't just in the theater, but in the hallways and the lounge areas, and providing different kinds of feelings from a living room type feel to more of the typical lecture hall with a podium. And they would have to finish their stop and go to another spot, continue. The audience, the visitors, had choices as to whether they wanted to continue following that poet or move on to somebody else and get a flavor from somebody else. So there's a lot of movement going on.
They would move.
They would have to change to a different, a totally different feeling from where they were before. So, and I had volunteers to stay with each artist so they didn't have to worry about where they had to be next. They just had to listen to the volunteer and go where he said.
That's a good idea.
But there were elements. There was so much planning going into this that it was guaranteed to start going wrong.
Yeah.
And so when things would get askew, it was things that I would welcome instead of like, oh no. Mm-hmm. It was like, all right, how are people going to deal with this?
How to deal with chaos.
And so it was pretty successful. I tell you, it was really hard on my psyche though, because I'm usually all about peace, love, harmony, and joy. And here I was creating chaos and confusion, and it worked.
Yeah.
And it took me a month to get over it in a lot of ways.
Really?
Oh, yeah, it was. Now, it was interesting that because it was at Clues Hall, it was the very first arts type event at Butler as the new semester started. And Butler students have to attend a certain amount of cultural events. And so this is the first one. So there's a whole bunch of freshmen, and it was pretty well publicized. So there was a lot of Butler students at this show. And we knew that was going to happen. So it was very important after doing an experience like that, because that's the whole thing. It was an experience. And it was really built for the artists to learn more. And the audience was just more of a tool for that to happen. So we had a discussion period afterwards. Now, one of the poets was so mad at me that she left right away.
Oh, during the event?
As soon as she finished her poem, she left. Oh, she was so mad at me, but we've since gotten along, and she's done poems a couple more times.
Because it was so chaotic. And things
Yeah,
went
it was
wrong.
it was really stressful, which was the whole point.
Yeah.
But some of the poems are things about like schizophrenia and the family history and abuse, and there was like some heavy subjects. So the other poets who stayed talked about how they got it while they were reciting their piece that they had done several times before, that they started getting new understandings of what they wrote that they hadn't thought about before, which was kind of the whole point, as well as helping them get into an emotional state where they were reciting better than they ever had in many cases. So in the discussion afterwards, in asking the audience, it's like I was trying to create chaos and confusion. Did you understand what was going on? And the general reaction was like, yeah, we got it. It was cool. One guy even said, I travel the world and I go to art openings everywhere, and this is the most interesting opening I've ever been to. So,
wow.
Which was real interesting because, like I say, we weren't trying to pretty things up. We were kind of going the opposite direction with the heavy topics that we were talking about. So it worked, but I'm never going to do it again. I'm going to stay with the peace, love, and joy.
You've already learned your lesson.
Yeah.
So the artists, you say, they said they were reciting their poems better than they had before.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually, to think about.
Because I was bringing out some raw emotions, which related to what they were writing about. So artists can, one, dream big and collaborate and really do some pretty terrific things as we all create together, which has been the draw from this program, that the artists do want to continue working together whenever they can. We've had a few move away, have jobs that conflict with times that we would have to get together and do stuff. Because as we know, most all artists have to have a day job of some kind. So there's a lot going on, but it's been a lot of fun and unique. So I encourage any artist who is listening to this. It's the Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts program, and you can easily find it on Facebook. It's probably
the third time I've heard about it now.
That's probably the best place. Eventually, I'm going to, if people see me out and about, I'm going to have some postcards or brochures or something with me. They're finally, after all these years, IUPUI is printing some up. They're going to be done
Some brochures
soon.
and cards? They're printing some up?
Yes, I'll have information on them.
To advertise for it?
Yeah, so when I'm talking to people like at Artist Industry Nights that are put together by the Arts Council of Indianapolis and openings and stuff, I'll carry a few around just like I would a business card.
And it takes place at the Christian Theological...
Not anymore. It's taken place many times at the Jewish Community Center, JCC, up on Hoover Road.
Okay.
And last year's class took place there, and so will the 2019-2020 class will be at JCC. Okay. And in February, will be the show the show and performance. So we'll get to see what all the new art is then.
That sounds interesting. Maybe I'll come check it out.
And then throughout the year, we have other opportunities where we show as an alumni group too. We just had a show at the St. Paul's on the Way, which is a secondary site opened by St. Paul's Episcopal Church that's at Kessler and Meridian. They've got a location right on Broad Ripple Avenue and Carrollton. And we were invited to have a show there, and they held us over another month. They liked what we had so much. And they're a group that's planning on more outward-facing art activities as well. And hopefully we'll probably use a lot of the artists that are part of our alumni group to help create future events and workshops and stuff. One of the aspects that came out of the Arts Garden show, the Spirit and Place Festival, was, I mentioned that we had to have a lot of volunteers for these. One of the volunteers for both the Clues Hall and the Arts Garden show is Margot Ward, who it turns out became the chairman of the board of KG, which is Community Action for Greater Indianapolis. She was inspired by all of us artists of different disciplines working together and putting on such big events and really cool events that she decided that arts should be part of all the social programs that KG has an umbrella over, which is going to include returning citizens, people who are reentering from being in prison and jails, homeless families, after-school programs, seniors.
You said all the programs that KG
right
umbrellas. Now, what is it?
And that's
say what KG stands for again?
Community Action for Greater Indianapolis.
Community
and you can find them.
Action.
Their website is cagi-nd.org. And so we've been in the process of creating opportunities for artists to go beyond just being volunteers in social programs, which many are, to being paid to help out and share their creative experiences with others.
So it's a way for them to get paid to share their art.
Right. Because artists are probably, of all professions, asked to be volunteers more than any other groups, as well as the fact that artists tend to be very community-oriented. Artists many times are solitary people, but it's amazing how the number of artists want to give back to the community. It's like being creative lets you feel like there's a communication going on with the universe in a way that makes you want to be a positive part of your community. So there's already a lot of artists who have volunteered in prisons and with senior citizens. I know myself, I taught an advanced art class for 10 years at the Correctional Industrial Facility in Pendleton. And I was finding that over and over with my core group is still have been the RSA artists to draw on as get feedback from, as well as people that I know would want to be involved, because they've all been involved. It's amazing. And I see that as I've been learning about more organizations who want to do more of their own personal growth. Lily gave out a lot of money last year, for instance, with organizations, the Lawrence Art Center and Harrison Center, and it's all these little smaller groups that want to get artists involved in the community. So in learning about all this that's going on, including with ROW, which is reusing our waterways, I'm probably getting that wrong. They've been giving out a lot of grant money for artists to do community-based work along with waterways. But we've also become aware that just giving artists money to go into communities isn't always successful. That you can put up a sculpture somewhere but not have the involvement, because how do you define a community has been lacking.
That's a good question. I have a ton of questions now.
So
how do you become, what does it mean to be involved with the community? What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. So as I was reaching out to people, one of the very first artists that ever responded about wanting to do more was Pam Blevins-Hinkle, who I mentioned is the executive director for Spirit and Place.
Pam Spinkle?
Pam Blevins-Hinkle. She is, along with being the executive director of Spirit and Place, she's also a musician and is wonderful at leading chorales and choirs, and she is an expert with chants.
Not Chance the Rapper.
Chants, yeah, it's CHANTS. African chants, improvised chants. She's
Okay.
a history of chants. She's
An expert?
She can. Oh yeah, she can make you. If you people who like me can't sing, if you're with a group of people that she's leading, all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I can sing. So meanwhile, she knows of a program that because of KG's involvement in other organizations, the Indianapolis Art Center, and we're going to bring a training session to Indianapolis, hopefully in January, that will provide that training necessary to be able to identify communities, work with communities, and be a community social artist, as well as tackling the topic of racism.
So she's going to train.
No, it's not. We're going to bring the
say it
experts in from out of state to Indianapolis to train artists.
To train artists. Okay.
Right.
They're going to bring in people.
So that's something that everybody can look forward to who's already volunteering and would like to be able to be more involved with it in understanding what a community is. I mean, that's, I've worked with, just went to a church committee meeting who wants to be out.
So my question is, now you've had artists that have already tried to implement art in the community. How have they done it, and how have they not succeeded?
And I don't want to go into. We don't need to go into details of what hasn't succeeded. We're just going to try to help artists be successful.
Okay. Because I'm just wondering, like, what they think, like, what
it's kind of like
what do they imagine as helping the community with their art?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, like, well, how can we learn from that?
It's more than just putting up
to
sculpture on a spot.
Okay. It's more than just throwing a sculpture somewhere.
Exactly.
I agree, because I agree.
So it's along the lines of Big Car, the tube factory. They're a great example of being successful in the way they've moved around and really had an impact on communities. Other organizations would also like to branch out and be a little more outward facing. And
what's Big Car done? Now, I have been there. I've been a part of a show there. I'd be interested to learn.
You need to have them on a podcast.
Okay.
So I think what people have learned, though, is that you have to be able to identify a community, and that's it's a lot of
First
different ways.
First thing is defining a community.
Which I named a few. People who are returning from prison, there's a community.
Okay.
Homeless families, homeless kids, there's a community. Kids who have had trouble with the law. So there's a lot of little micro communities go along beyond what's saying like a neighborhood.
Okay, good point.
Right.
So people who
community doesn't necessarily mean neighborhood. However, wouldn't it be great to have? You've heard of maker spaces, right?
Yeah.
So taking that further is to have creative spaces for basically the same idea, but a safe place where people in a community, more neighborhood, there you go, will have a safe place to go where they can paint, write poetry, do some music production, hopefully, and be creative in whatever aspect. Sewing, there's a lot of ways to be creative, but have a safe place there with an artist on hand that can help be a facilitator.
Mm-hmm. Just someone there to help them discover how they want to be creative.
Yeah, many times.
For people who don't, I would say, like, for people who just don't have as much access to that. Right.
Which are places like the Indianapolis Art Center, where I'm a faculty member. I've been there for 13 years. They have a great program called Art Reach, where they have artists who do after-school programs in both, not just in schools, but in community centers and places that want to have a safe place for kids to go after school. And so Art Center provides art instruction for those people. And they have a great show every year at the Art Center that's just It's amazing.
Okay. Art Reach?
It's called Art Reach.
They have artists go out
right.
to these places. And
right.
then they have a show at the
end of the year of what they've done. So the Art Center wants to do more along those lines because right now we've got so let me talk about the Art Center for a second.
Yeah,
yay,
absolutely.
Art Center.
We can do whatever you want.
One of my the Art Center is that a lot of people might not know. Oh, by the way, it's up in the north part of Broad Ripple, 67th Street on the south side, bordered by College on the west and the Monon Trail on the right, and along White River.
Yeah, it's actually a really good.
It's
a nice place.
It's a very nice place, popular for photographers to take their wedding and engagement pictures and senior pictures and whatever. And there's all kinds of trails with outdoor sculpture. And
I actually have never been inside the Art Center. I've only been outside of it.
So there's rotating shows. Their openings are usually on the second Fridays. There's the downtown first Fridays, so they do the second Fridays. And the Art's First Rate, usually that's artists from all over the country are part of a show. And the classes range from almost all the two-dimensional arts that you can think of to the three-dimensional glass and wood and ceramics and metal and jewelry making.
What do you teach?
I teach photography and video primarily. I've also taught painting and drawing.
Okay.
And the Indianapolis Art Center is the largest art school of its kind, which is a not-for-profit organization, not affiliated with a university. So it's the largest art school of its kind in the country.
The largest art school in the country, not
of
affiliated
its kind,
with
not affiliated with the university.
Wow.
Right.
I did not know that.
Yep. So I don't know if all the faculty knows that too. It keeps growing so much.
Sounds like it's doing well.
A lot of times people have been there because of the Broad Ripple Art Fair, which I think is now one of the top art fairs in the country. So if anybody's been there, you know that it's a pretty nice art fair.
I'm a bad artist.
That's all right. So what else would you like to know?
So you teach photography and video.
Right. Oh, and I teach a homeschooled class.
A homeschool class?
Right.
So
we have a homeschooled class right now on Thursdays at 10:30 to 12:30, which is a popular time. Everybody else that's in school, here's a chance for the homeschooled kids to have some experiences
they
can't get
to the art
house.
center?
Come to the art center.
Oh, wow.
So good,
because then they can meet other homeschooled kids and have a chance to socialize.
Yep. As well as
and
get exposed to
get
art.
A break. Or dads.
Yep, that's right. So
that's really interesting. So you are part of that? You teach the class, or
right?
Okay.
We also have a ceramics class. I don't do ceramics, but we do have an instructor, and I can't remember her name right now, who does the ceramics for homeschool. Eventually, it'd be nice to have more. Of course, you got to get the staff, like for glass blowing. You got to have somebody that's going to be available 10:30 to 12:30 who wants to do it. So. As we get more interest in those regards, that might pique some more instructor interest too. So for all the homeschoolers out there, the homeschool parents, call the Art Center.
Shout out to homeschoolers.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. All right, man. Now, so where are you from?
I am a native Hoosier, born in Greensburg, Indiana.
Greensburg.
Yep.
Where's Greensburg?
That is halfway between Indianapolis and Cincinnati, down 74. And famous for the tree on the courthouse tower.
Don't know what that is.
Oh
what
my
is
gosh.
That? Tree on the courthouse tower.
Yeah, there's a tree that grows on the courthouse tower.
Like on purpose, or
it started out as an accident, but became a tourist thing. So I think they've got, when they rebuilt the courthouse, the tower up there has an irrigation system and everything to keep the tree alive. So
wow.
Yeah, but originally started with just a tree seed getting stuck up in the mortar and growing.
A tree on a courthouse. That could be
the clock tower.
We could draw like a metaphor from that somehow.
Oh, yeah.
The tree of life.
Yep.
So how was your childhood, man, in Greensburg? It sounds like it's a small town. Is it?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's the
small
county
town.
seat of Decatur County.
When did you start getting interested in art or discover that you
I
had
was
an
always
interest
an
in it?
artist. I don't think I had a choice. My
Yeah.
grandmother was an artist of different disciplines. She had been a school teacher, but had been out of that before I was born. And was a Sunday school teacher, though, a musician, played piano, violin, melodica.
Dang, Grandma.
She was known
What's
for...
melodica?
It's an instrument that has keyboards on it that you blow through it. So it has more of an organ sound to it.
I wonder if I've ever seen something like that.
You may have. Every once in a while they pop up, but usually in the background somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Weird, but cool. She can play all
Steve
that
Colbert Show. Who's the band leader for the Steve Colbert Show? I'm
don't
forgetting
even
his name
know.
right now.
I can't even think of.
He plays
Steve
a
Colbert.
melodica quite often.
Okay, I'll remember that.
But she was mostly a visual artist. She painted, she did landscapes and still lifes, and she was mostly known for painting on china. All the little
bet
delicate
that's hard.
decorations on platters and plates and cups and saucers and things like that.
Wow.
So she had me do everything, though, like wood burning and mosaics and you name it. It was whatever, popsicle sticks. I was doing it all.
So you had a
And-
lot of experience.
Right. So I
When you were young.
I grew up with art as part of my life. And even as I got older, like even in the high school, I never really thought about it so much. But it's like art supplies would sort of appear because my parents would buy me stuff that I hadn't even asked for. And so I had an art studio in my bedroom the whole time where
Wow.
I would paint. And I was also fortunate to have, I went to Arlington High School in the 60s, graduated in 70.
Okay.
So I'm an old guy.
Okay. I've had a
And-
few old people on here.
And,
You know, Constance. Constance was on here too.
oh, really? Okay.
It was interesting talking to her about her experience at
Northern Indiana.
IU,
Yeah.
Bloomington in the 60s.
So, yeah, I went to IU also, Bloomington.
Okay. Okay.
But in high school, Arlington and North Central were in the top 5 high schools in the country back then.
In the country?
In the country, yeah.
Wow.
And we had amazing teachers. And in the art department, we had practicing artists who were teachers, serious teachers. The head of the department who did, along with calligraphy and painting, did graphic design for Ellis Ayres department store. And so they were all practicing artists. And I learned more from them than when I went to IU, frankly.
Wow.
So it was amazing to be
I
able to
think it
have that
sounds like a
experience.
college. Usually
Well,
the
it was
teachers
it
are like
was
working artists.
it was college prep,
Right.
and that was a problem. I went to a
I
grade
see.
school that was high school prep, and did a lot of experimental stuff. And then, so when I got to high school, it was college prep. In fact, back then, I think we had like 80% of our class went to college. It was like a tremendously high
Back in the
percentage.
60s,
Yeah.
that seems pretty good.
So for any time.
Okay.
So when I went to IU, though, I did have it was almost depressing, the quality of my classes compared to what I had in high school, because we had already had stuff to practically get us through college. My first day at an art class at IU, I can't remember the professor's name, which is probably just as well. I was very limited because I was a freshman, and there was so many people that wanted to, you had to be a declared major to take any art classes. And the first day of class, I find out I'm the only one that even had art in high school of everybody in my drawing class. And we were doing drawing exercises that I had to talk to the teacher after and later. I said, this is like, come on, please. And he was like,
What were they have you draw? Like, what was it?
oh, just,
Like circles?
it was like continuously non-ending pencil exercises of knowing how the different weights of pencils felt and
Okay.
mirroring objects and doing strange things with pencil weight. And over and over and over and over again. So I ended up leaving IU, left a scholarship behind to go into the real world, and I did take more classes.
So you had a scholarship there?
Yeah.
Wow.
It
just wasn't challenging enough for you, right?
No.
Okay.
I was real involved in high school. For instance, I was on the forensics team. I was in theater, and I also played baseball.
As in, like, forensic?
No, that's
like
speech team. So, like oration, debate. There's several categories that you can compete in high school. I did original oratory, where you have to write a speech and then you give it, and you get first place or nothing. I usually didn't get anything, but so when I went to IU as a freshman, one of the classes I ended up taking was a speech class, and then again when I was there, I was like, oh man, this is really not the kind of caliber I was hoping for. So I quit going to class. I shouldn't tell this story, but I am anyway. I've already started. But I realized, maybe I should go check in on the class, and happened to go there on the day where everybody was giving their midterm speech that they had been doing research on, and this was like their key grade for the semester, was giving this speech, and you just had to give a outline for yourself and copy of the outline for the teacher. So I thought, I guess I better, they're doing it in alphabetical order, so I'm a Cooper. So I was used to this and from school of being up fairly early in line. So I started writing out an outline on the history of cartooning, which I had done a report on in high school, and I remembered all this stuff, and I had interviewed some political cartoonists and had some good info and remembered stuff. And so I did an outline for doing a speech on the history of cartooning and went up. I was probably the third person that went up there. And while I'm giving my speech, I'm drawing an original cartoon on the blackboard. And when we're done for the critique, everybody had to sit there for a critique afterwards. Everybody was amazed. I said, wow, you just were talking and you drew at the same time. It's like, how did you do that? And the teacher was like, oh, this is so great. And then she marked my paper. She gave me an A+. And I'm like, well, this is cool. And then she asked me, she goes, well, I saw you before you came up here. You were writing furiously. What was that all about? And I said, oh, well, I came in the class today and learned that we're giving a speech and had to have an outline, so I was writing the outline. And everybody in the class was like, oh! And I realized I had done something really stupid, because the teacher said, well, this was supposed to be a prepared speech, and what you just did was more improvised. And she marked me down from an A+ to an A-. So that was my lesson right there, was to keep my mouth shut and not think so highly of myself after getting kudos.
So you're able to go back, at the end of the semester? From what you said, you stopped going to class, and then at the end of the semester you went back, you were still
in time for a
technically
test, right?
Enrolled.
Oh, yeah.
So, with college courses, most of the time you don't really have to show up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sometimes the teachers take attendance and...
Right. Well, I also made the mistake of taking golf for phys ed, and it was a golf academic scholarship that I had. So the first day of that class, we were waiting for the teacher to show up, and there was some clubs sitting around, some balls. So I started chipping up on the green, and after a while, some of the kids came over and asked me if I was the instructor, and I was like, no. So when the teacher showed up and started talking about how to grip a club, when at a moment when I could talk to him privately, I told him, I said, I don't think I'm in the right class, because I'm here on a scholarship. And he goes, oh, then you don't have to worry about coming to class. Just show up for the final. And so I was like, okay.
All right.
Yep. And when I showed up for the final, it was an open book test too, but I didn't have the book. But I still only missed 2 questions, and both of those were on a form of gambling that I didn't know about.
Okay.
So I didn't feel too bad.
Okay. So you knew much, did you play golf then? So you
Yeah,
know
I
a lot
still
about
like
golf.
play golf. I'm one of
Still
those
do.
rare artists I've been told who really like sports. Where we live now, we bought the house because of the backyard to play volleyball. So, and I played tennis. I coached almost 40 sports.
Sports are interesting. I used to be nihilistic about sports, like, oh, sports, blah blah blah. But now I've been learning some things, within the past year. I understand and appreciate more the value of that kind of competition and watching people, score a goal from at a certain point distance from like a basketball goal. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I appreciate it more now. Did you play? Now you played golf. Did you play any other sports throughout your life?
Yep. I was a baseball player. Ended my career as during high school years as a catcher. My brother is 2 years younger, was a pitcher. My third brother was really good at basketball. We grew up with a basketball court in our backyards that was set up with
cool.
lights for night play. So we had people from schools all over that came to our house year-round to play on our basketball court. So I was really good at horse, though. I wasn't good as my youngest brother.
That was always fun.
and I love tennis. So when I had two of my boys, I brought them up with sports too: soccer, baseball, basketball, tennis. I coached all those sports.
Cool.
So almost 40 teams altogether.
Wow.
And had them try every sport they wanted, including karate and anything else. So they ended up being #1 players at Lawrence North High School and during their days. So that was really cool. And
So is that where you live, Lawrence?
yep,
right
I'm
now?
a Lawrence
Okay.
Township person.
Okay.
So when I go visit galleries, I have to travel from there to go downtown.
Yeah. It's quite a bit of a drive.
Yep. Which we can segue in, back going to downtown. When I went to IU at Bloomington, like we were talking about, and when I finished school, I didn't have the Heron connection like a lot of people did, and there was really no place to show art. Everybody was just pretty much on their own.
So this was back in the 70s?
Yeah, back in the 70s into the 80s. And it wasn't until mid-80s when a few people started opening up some galleries on Massachusetts Avenue, and that was a derelict part of town. That was the dives, empty buildings. That's a place where you could go and buy your heroin and stuff. It was a scary place to be after dark, which is why it was so cheap when people like Mark Rushman could start a gallery there. And so it was during this time, 431 Gallery had started up. A little history of that in Indianapolis. They just had a show 3 years ago, I think, at the Indiana State Museum that recreated the 431 Gallery. And artists were starting to get together more. And that was a pivotal time for me because there was a call to action for artists of all disciplines. Well, it started out with visual artists to get together because the Indianapolis Museum of Art had decided that they were not going to continue having the biannual show of Indiana artists. And that was like the only place, if you were an Indiana artist, to show your work locally, because there just wasn't much. It coincided with the Pan Am Games coming to Indianapolis, and they decided that they were going to show the Pan Am art instead of showing all the Pan Am countries our art. It was the other way around, and that they weren't going to even have the biannual anymore at all. So there were 3 artists that were friends that decided to get everything together. It was Ellie Siskind, Doris Hales, and Dick Nicholson. And they did an announcement for all the artists to get together and have a meeting in Heron. I didn't know about the first meeting, but the second meeting, I happened to see a little tiny, small paragraph tucked away in the paper that said there was going to be a meeting. I was like, whoa, artists having a meeting, I'm going to go. And this time, I guess there were more artists. There were probably 150 artists showed up. And from that, we decided, like Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland in an old-time movie of, hey, kids, let's put on a show. This is also a period of time when buildings were starting to be demolished and adapted to create the Circle Center Mall. So the Goodman Jewelers on Washington Street was going to be part of the mall, but at the time their building was empty. It's like 6 stories of an empty building. And the plan was to put together a show that would show IMA just how important the arts were in Indianapolis.
Okay.
And the only requirement to be a part of this show was to help in some way. So, because I'd already been doing graphic design, I became the in charge of publicity, and others were in charge of staging and signing up. And I mean, there's this, when you're going to do a show that you're going to put art into 5 floors of a building, there was a lot of work that had to be done. We put in lighting. We built 2 stages, because then it was artists of all disciplines were at that point welcome. So we had poets and dancers and musicians. So we had 2 stages, one more of a cabaret style, and another one is just a performance stage. We had installations, paintings, sculptures, the music, and poetry, and the attendance for it was more in one weekend than the IMA had ever done in a month for any other show they'd had at that time.
Wow.
So that we were like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So along at this time, coincidentally, was the beginning pushes by Bob Beckman Jr. and others to create a arts council. And so from this group of artists that had all just been putting together the show, during the planning of it, we decided that we would create a coalition of Indianapolis artists. And we would have monthly meetings of about 100 to 150 artists every month. We would have speakers.
That sounds like a lot of artists.
Yeah, it was. Oh, and because of my work with the show, which was called A Creative Affair, which we have a Creative Affair Day that was signed by the Mayor Hudnut, and we had a lot of support. I got to be the first president of the Coalition of Indianapolis Artists.
Okay.
And that led to getting more politically involved, rallying the troops to go to the city council meetings when they were here having hearings about creating an arts council, being on WFYI show, and Bob Beckman happened to have a TV show at the time about the arts, and we were on a radio show, and at the time, it was listening to it, it's fun because we referred to it as the Metropolitan Arts Council at the time, MAC. Mm-hmm. And so we got the arts council passed. It was, and so the rest was history. I got to be because of that, I got to be the artist representative when we'd have meetings on what the art council was going to be about, and actually doing the paperwork, and what's the plan, and what are we going to do, and how we're representing artists and all that. I got to be there for that, including making sure that the first logo was done ethically. The Children's Museum, dropping names here in a way that they wouldn't remember. They were having, this is like 1988.
Okay.
Children's Museum had announced they were providing the opportunity to design a logo for them. Of course, you had to design the logo and then have it picked. But of course, and it was all for free, but it was for the, you get to have it for your portfolio. It's good on the resume, opportunity. And artists would always just flock to those things. Mm-hmm. And so it's time for the Arts Council. We need a logo. I was like, no, we're not going to have anybody do free art. We're going to pay people to do the art. So what we were going to do is have a portfolio review. If you're interested in doing the logo, bring in your portfolio. We'll take a look at it. We'll pick the top 5 that then we'll pay to do some ideas, some concept art. And then from that, we'll pay the artist to prepare the final art.
That's a good idea.
So we got started off on the right foot, I think, ethically.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing when they decided, the very first start for art was they were going to decide, the Arts Council wanted to have an art show as well. They would host a visual art show. And one of my big ethical complaints at the time, and still do, but I haven't been able to do anything about it, was entry fees to be at an art show. There's many art shows where it's the art show pay is a fundraiser, basically. And it's the money that artists contribute that is paying for the art show plus, even though maybe less than 10% of the submitting artists get approved for the show. So 90% of artists who are paying their entry fee don't get to have any of the benefit of being the contributor for that fundraiser.
That's why I kind of shied away from entering into shows, is because there were entry fees.
Yeah.
And it's like, is that worth it to me right now? I don't really think so. Sometimes it'd be like $50, sometimes $20.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I had a real problem with that too. And for it was actually the only time the Arts Council has done a show. They decided that wasn't quite where they needed to be heading at the time. We did not have an entry fee. Instead, if you got accepted, then you would pay a fee. And it's slightly higher than what it might normally be. But then you already knew that you were in.
Yeah.
So it made it a lot more palatable.
Okay, that's good. That sounds ethically good.
Right.
I like how you say that.
So shortly after that period of time, I totally dropped out of the art scene because I was, we had our first kid during this time. So at a coalition meeting, which was held at the Phoenix Theater, Brian Fonseca really wanted to have a meeting at the brand new Phoenix Theater that was, actually is now the third generation old. There was only like a light bulb over the stage type, wasn't quite finished. All the seats weren't in yet. But we had a meeting there, and we decided because we had the stage, we'd make it a show and tell meeting. Mm-hmm. Bring your art and get up on the stage and show everybody. So I brought my little toddler son and told everybody that this was now my newest art project and that I was going to be just not being part of the art scene anymore for a while. And so it wasn't until my second son went into high school and I wasn't coaching sports anymore that I started teaching at the art center. And
wow. So you hadn't done any art at all? Really?
Oh, I was doing art.
But you weren't involved.
I wasn't going to the shows. I wasn't going to openings. I wasn't reading magazines. I was developing my art more in isolation, except for Ellie Siskind. Mm-hmm. One of the original people that got everybody together. We became really good friends and a major influence on my artistic life. We didn't even talk about art in those intervening years, even though we were still great friends. But the moment I decided, it's like, okay, now I'm ready to get back into the art community, she said, okay, there's a new organization that just started up called IDATA, which is the Indianapolis Downtown Artists and Dealers Association. So I went to a board meeting, or 2 or 3, because I know the only way to get anything out of an organization is to be active in it. So I would go to the board meetings, and then there happened to be an occasion where I read in the e-opportunities from the Arts Council that there was the opportunity to show your art in a conference room for a new mayor's office down in the southern part of the city. And I wrote in and saying, this really isn't an opportunity. This is them wanting free art to decorate a room for and calling it an opportunity.
Just kind of tried to slide
which
it in
got
there.
me introduced to Shannon Linker, who is now vice president, and found out how brilliant she is and how she really cares for Indianapolis artists. And so at that next meeting, I brought up to the board about ethics and how should we handle that. And I was immediately told, well, who do you want on your committee? Which, of course, what you got to expect. If you're going to have an idea in a volunteer organization, you better be prepared to act on it. So I immediately asked Shannon to be on the committee and a few other artists, and we wrote the ethical guidelines and ethical issues and fair practices guidelines. I think I'm saying it right. Where we tackled a lot of ethical issues that artists face, like art fairs and art shows and galleries and copyright and alternative spaces. And those are still used they were adapted by the Arts Council after IDATA adapted them and published them, and there's still reference. There's a Facebook page that the Arts Council links to. For anybody that ever wants to look up the ethical issues, like donating art, artists are asked to donate all the time. So it became a practice. If you wanted publicity from the Arts Council for your charitable event, and you're going to ask artists to donate art, then there's certain conditions that you need to do, like invite the artist to the function. How about a little share of if you're going to auction the piece off, save a percentage for the artist. And just little courtesies like being invited is pretty big. And everybody, so some big regular charitable events immediately were like, oh, we never thought about it. So nobody ever said anything. It's always been tradition to do it one way. And nobody has ever, to my knowledge, ever had a problem with incorporating and thinking about the artists a little bit more when they donate art. Okay.
So you said no one had a problem with that? They just never thought of it.
That's basically the first thing is, oh, yeah, we never thought about it. It's a good idea.
Interesting.
Yep.
Man, dude. Okay. Now, I know Shannon's she's not the president. She's a
vice president.
She's the vice president
and director of Gallery 431.
Right, which is where the Arts Council office is, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And I got to have a one-person show there 10 years ago, I guess it is. And I didn't realize until later that I was the first person that had video art there and also incorporated performance art. So when I think of a space, if you go to my website, cooperfineart.com, you can see what my paintings are like. I'm pretty detailed. I use a combination of photorealism, but also abstract expressionism at the same time. But I think of a space and not just the walls. So I like sound, and the music is real important to me, which really was nice to have a lead up to when I became involved with RSA again. I had already been used to collaborating with artists and appreciated creative input all the time. I like creative people, and everybody is creative. Some people just don't know how they're creative. As artists are willing to take the risk and put it out there.
I think there's a spectrum. Some feel the need to be creative more than some other people. I don't know if that makes sense. Because you and I, like, you have the desire to do it. Maybe you could argue that you've been exposed to it your whole life, and maybe you had a lot of encouragement as a child. And, but there are other people who just don't really know how to find it or care to, and I don't know. But I do agree that everybody has a little bit of creative spark in them.
So that's my role in life. That is my mission.
Okay.
That is my call, is to help people realize that they're creative.
Okay.
That's why it fits in so well being at the Art Center.
You want to help people realize that they're creative.
Right.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just a matter of finding out what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can be creative in how you walk. Which is a line that I used a lot back in my days at Central State Hospital.
Central State Hospital? What did you do there?
I was a rehabilitation therapist, and I ran the behavior modification ward. Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Behavior modification?
Right. It was the only locked ward other than the jail ward, and that was for people who had behavior problems that they couldn't just be left, let alone walking around the place. And
how did you get that opportunity? How did you get that job?
After life was going really good for me for a while, I had become very spiritual, was meditating and fasting once a week, and being creative, and life was so good I decided I wanted to give back to the community. I went to...
How old were you at this point?
22.
22?
20,
okay.
No, wait, maybe 24. In my younger 20s. And I made a comment to a good friend of our family's. I said, I would really like to have a job where I could give back to the community. And she goes, oh, Central State Hospital needs people. You should go there. So I went and talked to the people, and they said, oh, we would love to have you. What would you like to do? And I didn't know what they did, though. So, which years later was the same comment I got when I went to the Indianapolis Art Center. It's like, yes, we'd love to have you. What would you like to do? You can do anything you want. So I started off at Central State working as an attendant with the geriatric ward. And at the same time, the state started giving me training to be a rehabilitation therapist so I could use art therapy and music therapy and stuff. And when I got to that point, I told them that I wanted to be on the behavior mod ward, which is the place that nobody really wanted to be.
Right.
Staff and patients.
Right.
And the staff that was there was really good. But if you were, you just didn't want to go there voluntarily always. So when I wanted to go there, they were like, oh, of course you can. And fairly quickly, everybody had an individual behavior modification program. Whereas the doctor, psychologist, the team would come up with a plan, which made it so you had all these dozen or more plans for everybody to change their behavior to get them out of there. And after observing for a while and being part of that little community, I was able to come up with one single plan for everybody. That was, after I had left there, I was told that plan was still in place when Central State was closed down. So it was nice to know I had a legacy somewhere.
Yeah, could you elaborate on that more? Let's get down and deep, man. That's interesting. I'm interested in psychiatric mental health. I'm actually taking classes to eventually pursue maybe a psychiatric mental health nursing degree. Or I'm considering now getting into addiction neuroscience, maybe, because of my experience with addiction and my interest in neuroscience. So the psychology and psychiatry avenue is something I'm interested in. So when you say that you developed one plan that would work for everybody,
right?
That sparks some interest.
Well, we had a built-in goal: get off the ward.
Okay.
So how do you get off that ward? Well, it was real easy. Get up in the morning, make your bed, eat breakfast, put your trash away, brush your teeth, little things like that. You would get
this
points
was for the people?
Yeah, for the patients.
Now, what kind of stuff? What was wrong with them? Schizophrenia?
Oh,
bipolar?
you name it. Oh, yeah. The main reason I really wanted to go to that ward was because of one particular patient named David, who was only about 19 at the time, but he'd been in the hospital. He'd been institutionalized ever since he was a young kid. And we would know today that he was probably had some autism and ADHD type problems, which back then in the mid-'70s, nobody had words for even. And he always wanted to escape. And which is like, yeah, you're in a mental hospital and you don't think you should be there. Of course you're going to escape. But his problem was that he liked getting high too. And so if he didn't have any pot smuggled into him, he would escape to go inhale the fumes of gasoline from cars, which of course was causing some brain damage.
He would do it, though. He would be able to escape sometimes.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to be on the ward, was really to work with him. And
but you knew him?
He was famous in the hospital.
Famous in the hospital, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he'd been there since he was a kid. And now he was 19. He'd probably gotten there when he was 8 years old.
Why was he there? Like, where were his parents?
Northern Indiana.
And so they couldn't handle him.
They
enough,
couldn't
or
handle
they were
him.
Just...
So I know it's rough. Which is why I wanted to work with him.
Yeah.
And the others too. In fact, after I got up there, they'd sent one of the geriatric patients up to that ward to be with me, because after I left, she kind of fell apart while I had been there. She was, her obsessive behavior was taking apart fabric. She could de-thread a $1 bill into a little pile, a little rat pile, thread by thread.
That was her obsession?
To deal with all the stress and anxiety of being in a mental hospital too. She was a geriatric, but she had been in there since her 20s. So she was also institutionalized. So I got to use art and music and being in consistent behavior to help people that had problems, many times temporary. They come in very chronic into the ward, and then we'd be able to stabilize them and affect their behaviors and help them understand and be able to get out of there, was the whole goal.
Mm-hmm. So you just implement the simple behaviors of getting up and making your bed and brushing your teeth, taking out the trash, just to implement.
Right, and as you got more points, you could even go to the cafeteria to eat.
They would get points.
They get points. That was the easy way to take care of it. You brush your teeth, you got a point. Took so many points to get off the ward.
I should do that with my children.
Or to gain privileges along the way. So it was real simple. That's the whole point, was making it real simple.
Yeah.
Everybody could understand it.
And if they got points, they would be able to go eat lunch.
Exactly.
That turned out to be effective?
Yeah, that's why it was used for so many years.
Oh, so where did you learn that, or what inspired that idea for them to make their beds and take out the trash?
I guess because I'm a creative. Observant. You got to be observant.
Well, I would make the argument. I guess in my experience, maybe it's just my perspective of my 20s being very bad. I had no discipline at all. I'd never appreciated the value of making my bed in the morning or doing those small, responsible things. I don't know. So I guess from my experience being creative, I always experienced creative people as being kind of nihilistic. Like, there's no meaning to life, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to just make something great in my messy, disorganized environment. So that's interesting, though. But now now I appreciate that those habits now. But anyway, so what's your case for that? Like, why is it that you thought of that? Because you're creative.
I don't know if I've never been asked to think about it that way. I guess it's my natural inclination. I'm an organizer. I'm also very rare. From all these things I've been talking about, like with the RSA program and all that.
That makes sense.
I am an organizer, which is also rare among artists.
Yes.
So I got the sports thing going, and I got the organizer thing going. I care about my artist tribe, basically. And so
it's the leadership aspect in you then, because leaders are usually ones who make their beds in the morning. What do you value if you can't, can you understand the values of a community if you can't even make your own bed? you know.
Okay.
So that's interesting.
It's all right. Now, everything wasn't all in my own personal life. I was so involved in this, though, and I did have a girlfriend I was living with that we broke up because I had lost my sense of humor. Because I was so involved with with work that, and when she said that, I realized it, and that's when I continued plans to go to Arizona and go live in the desert in the mountains.
What?
So I eventually, after about a year and a half of planning, I'd given my notice at Central State. Technically I wasn't employed by Central State anymore. My last weekend, I took David camping. They released him. This escape risk guy, they released him to a guy that doesn't work for the state anymore to go camping for the weekend. But it was definitely was part of the highlights of his life at that point, other than one time when he escaped to go see a concert.
Which concert?
I think he was into Yes.
Okay. So you got to take him camping with you?
So I got to take him camping with me.
How'd that go?
Oh, it was great.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Sitting around the campfire at night and talking, and after the weekend going back.
And he was only
goodbye.
19.
Yeah, right. After that, I went to Arizona for a while, and did several paintings there.
Why Arizona?
I wanted to go, and Jesus had been my example at that point. The simple lesson that you're supposed to love everyone. And so if Jesus was going to be my example, and my life had been going great at that point, I thought, well, I should go into the mountains and have God tell me what I should be doing. And so that's what I did. I was there for several months. I mean, I just didn't immediately go up into the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
I played around in the desert. And
had you ever been in that part of the U.S. before that time?
Only driving through it on a family vacation.
Okay.
So no, there was just, I'd read a lot of books and about the Yaqui Indians and Hopi Indians especially, and their belief traditions. And so in some ways I was hoping to meet some Yaqui medicine man or something, and that never happened. But it was amazing. I went there with nothing, and just on faith that everything
How'd
would
you
be
get
okay.
there? Did you drive?
Oh, I had a hippie van.
Hippie van. Awesome.
Yeah, so my best friend and I rode out there together on our initial trip, and he went on to L.A.
Okay.
Which he still lives in L.A. to this point.
He is still in L.A.?
Right.
Wow.
And so yeah, it was a great experience. Got a chance to, I hitchhiked back to Indianapolis from Tucson to Indianapolis. That was another whole adventure. I'm thinking of making that adventure, that hitchhiking trip, the backbone of if ever I write a story, a novel about with adventures from my life.
Yeah, dude.
My hitchhiking trip will be the backbone I'll be doing while I reminisce on these different stories.
Yeah, that would be cool. Do you like to write?
Writing is hard.
I
tend to be, I think about rhythm and using different words and structure.
Do you write your own biography? Or do you have somebody else write it?
No, I've always written everything.
Okay.
I supported my life. When I got into, like I think I mentioned when we started the Coalition of Indianapolis Artists, I had already started my own graphic design business to be able to support my arts. Okay.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, that's what led me into being the publicity chairman.
Okay.
So,
seems like you have a lot of experience.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Which now I forget why I was bringing up graphic design again. So way to go taking it down another rabbit hole.
I asked you if you like writing.
Oh yeah, just asking about writing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Writing's difficult, but I know I should do it. I've written a lot for clients, for instance. I've written professionally, and I've written some really bad poetry in my day.
Clients, graphic design clients,
right?
Okay,
So,
like you'd have to write on their websites, or I'm actually not sure what all goes into graphic design. I'm imagining.
Oh well, my graphic design became more. I became more than a graphic designer. By the time I was done, which I'm still not really done. All my clients haven't died off or retired yet.
I remember you mentioning that when I talked to you at the Jazz Kitchen.
So magazine articles, press releases. There's a lot of writing. So I ended up becoming more of a communication strategist than just a graphic designer.
So graphic design, you would then, well, back then, like, say for a magazine article, you would design. The whole magazine, or just a section?
Oh, I've designed whole magazines.
And you would write it?
And catalogs and programs and.
Okay.
If you name it in the marketing world, I've probably done it. That's how I got into video, is because I was producing TV commercials. And so I was writing commercials, directing, producing, but I would hire the cameramen and editors. And that's where I loved working with them and the equipment that they had. And being in an editing booth, I was like, that was like the best place in the world, was to be in a professional studio editing booth. I just thought that was the greatest thing.
Wow.
So eventually after I'd had my first Mac, because I started in all this before there were desktop computers, so I jumped on getting a Mac pretty early. And the very first video card that came out, I bought. Mm-hmm. It was $1,200. I can remember that too, because the price of a computer back then was like
video card?
A card.
Video card.
A card to put into your computer to make it do
How much was
video. $1,200.
How big was it?
It's a chip. It's a chip, yeah. And that allowed you to do video on a computer. So when I did my first video of the old fair train, the old antique fair train with the big black smoke and the coal-fired chugging down the track, I took a video of that, and I was able to digitize it through another device to get it onto the computer. And I called one of my business associates in, Alan Franco. Al, come here, look at this. And I had a big monitor for back then, but this little like 3-inch square on this big huge 21-inch monitor was the video of the train, woo, woo. And he said, can you make that image bigger? And I was like, what are you talking about? Do you know how much memory it takes to do video? Back then it was a Mac 2 CI, it had 200 megabytes of hard drive. And he said, well, when you make it full screen, let me know. And so I was like, well, okay.
Right.
But he did point out how kind of useless it was, other than the fact that it gave me early practice.
Okay.
And from my interest
useless
in doing...
just because it was so small?
Yeah, you couldn't do a TV commercial on a little, what's now would be a thumbnail. Mm-hmm. But that was pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So you got experience with the video then.
Right.
You said you learned video in high school?
I learned video from just doing video.
Just doing video?
Just doing video. However, I can go back to 1968 and 1969 for deciding that I knew I was going to do digital art someday, computer-generated art. Walter Cronkite, who was the CBS famous correspondent news anchor, had a show that only lasted 2 years called The 21st Century. It was the first TV show that had computer-generated music as its theme song. And so there were segments, all the segments were about technology, whatever was being worked on that would be bigger in the future. So one of them was computers, which then were all big mainframes that only major universities and NASA had. And there was a couple of times he had artists that he featured who were doing art on computers, which was pretty basic stuff, black and white usually. And this one artist, she had to use a major university computer to be able to do it. You had to get time and stuff to be able to do it. But at that time, I realized I want to do that someday, and someday computers are going to be more accessible to everybody. So from that point on, I paid attention to what was going on with computers, and even got to do the advertising for what was considered to be the very first desktop computer. And it was called something like, had a weird name like Oswald. It was the first.
Was it a Mac?
No, it's like an Oswald. There was no
Okay.
Apple yet.
Okay. I guess Apple wasn't until the 80s.
Right.
But Oswald. I was just thinking, like, that sounds familiar, but I couldn't remember.
And I still got parts from that.
Oh, wow.
I still have a punch card that I got from a mainframe from the Indiana State Police Department. So I paid attention to all this for all this time, just knowing that someday I wanted to be able to do computer art.
That's smart.
So when the Mac 2CI came out, I knew that it was time to hop on and get
that
going.
bandwagon.
And from that, I was in the very first digital art show in the state of Indiana, which was hosted by University of Indianapolis, which back then was Indiana Central University.
When was that?
That's probably around 92,
Okay.
sometime around
The
there.
first digital art show
Right, in Indiana.
in Indiana.
That was a invitational show, and
So now I'm trying to imagine what that would look like. Was it art that was printed out?
yes,
Okay.
printed out, framed, hung on a wall type art.
How long did it take to print? At
It's
that
real
time?
interesting that you asked that question, because at the time, Marbaugh downtown was the only location where that had a color printer. There, it's like brand new. It's like a color printer. It's in a business.
Uh-huh.
And I did a design that had these phases of revolving moons, and with different colors. And it was put together finally in Quark Express, from Photoshop to Quark Express for the layout. And,
They had Photoshop at that time?
oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Photoshop was out real early.
Okay.
And the next, I took it to the file to them, which is on a floppy disk. So it's like less than 2 megabytes of a file size. And the first night it wouldn't print out. They said they came in the morning and it was still clunking. So they said, well, we're going to try it. We're going to restart it, and we'll try it again tonight. And the next day they said, oh, it ran all night and still wouldn't print. It's like the file size, the file is just too complicated. At less than 2 megabytes, it was too complicated. So I had to simplify my digital art so that it was able to print out on a color printer, which it did. Was got to
Right.
be in the show.
How'd you have to do that? Or how did you do
Oh, I had to take some of the detail out that I had of the moons.
I still can't imagine what like, so you're on the computer and what, like, software you used Photoshop to make this?
Right,
And so you just have to go in and take out some detail on this image.
right.
And that worked? It was able to print after that?
And then it worked.
Wow.
Yep, so that was still
Is there a picture on your website?
No.
Okay.
I still have it, but no.
Because I saw some, like,
Yeah.
images with planetary aspects.
Oh, yeah. See, I still, and what I paint about has been for too long about the same theme. I got to change that a little bit, because I've been painting about science and faith. I've always been into science ever since I was a kid.
What about science?
Theoretical physics and astronomy
I
mostly.
wanted to ask you about the theoretical. That was actually going to be the first question I asked you.
Oh,
But no, it's been great. You said, so say it again. Science. What about science?
theoretical physics.
Okay.
And also, like you mentioned, psychology. I really am into the neuro pathways of the brain,
Right.
the structure of the brain and how it works, and so many areas that are filtering out information, actually.
Yeah, and also, I read astronomy too.
Astronomy
online.
also, yep.
Now, what about the theoretical physics that interests you?
I started studying Einstein when I was probably 13 and 14. And by the time I was 15, I'd started playing around and came up with that when you looked at Einstein, that you could theoretically get into multiple universes. And
when you studied his theories?
Yeah. And I had these pages of equations and graphs that I took to the head of the math department at my school and showed him what I come up with. And his response was, well, that's nice, but why don't you just, you can study that more when you're in college and just worry about what you're working on now. And I immediately had one of those moments that you hear about that can go one way or another with a teacher. I immediately totally in that instant became disinterested in math. And turned my attention to art more. That I would explain the universe using visual symbols as opposed to mathematical symbols. Two different languages. And I didn't feel like I was that great at math anyway, which I'm not. Which maybe I could have been if he would have said, oh, wow. But that's what I realized. It wasn't until many, many years later as an adult that I realized he had no idea what I was talking about. That what I was talking about was the same concept that string theory was being talked about at that same period of time.
And he just didn't have an understanding of it himself, and then therefore told you to wait till your college years. Man, teachers, they can...
So my art teachers, on the other hand, were really challenging and would deliberately challenge me.
So you decided then to express your scientific thoughts visually. Right.
So I still keep up with what's going on in physics and theoretical physics. I like reading about it, and I watch the seminars when panels of scientists get together and talk about new stuff. And I have that still. There's that right brain, left brain aspect to how we perceive things. We got that scientific and the religious side. We're built, and as one smartest man I ever have had the privilege to meet referred to it as science and art, not even religion or faith, but art itself. That the right brain, left brain is really more evenly divided, where art is on that same aspect of spirituality and faith and religions.
Have you heard the counter arguments against that theory?
No.
Listen to Mark's interview, and he says that theory is actually not true.
Yeah, saying right brain, left brain has been too convenient considering we have hemispheres.
I've been hearing it this whole time. To me, it makes sense that our left brain is more linguistic. But I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I don't know to what degree. I think what his argument was, or what he said, is that in response to the same stimuli, both sides of the brain are active. But maybe they're both active just in different ways.
In the way that
they're active the same amount, but the left brain's more linguistic, the right brain's more visual. Maybe that's what he meant. I still believe it, though. I still believe they're separated.
Yeah, but the only way we have to know, if through MRIs and the fact that we study people with brain damage.
See, that's what I want to do. I like looking at the MRI things of the brain.
Yep.
So I asked you that because it's interesting. When I went to Heron, I started getting into psychology. And then that was my gateway science into other sciences, like physics. And I started reading about Einstein too. Thinking about magnetism. So what about, like, anything specific in regards to theoretical physics that you're interested in?
Time.
Time? What about time?
How
Not just the Pink Floyd song.
whether or not, just how much of an illusion it is, how fluid it is, and wave-like, and how it relates to mass. And
Was it Einstein's E equals mc squared that you...
yeah, but see, now there's
Study?
still a missing. Well, that was just one little part. There is still a faith to science. Like, if some people say, well, I don't believe in religion, it's like, well, what do you believe in? Because we're genetically wired to have belief and faith as part of who we are. Just like we want to have adventures, we're curious. So in that science aspect of looking at time and how it all relates, how does it all come together, there's still a root belief that is part of science, which is inertia. There's an equation for inertia that is like the root of all, it's like Genesis of science. In the beginning is the Genesis of the Bible, and in the Genesis of
The equation of inertia is
the
like...
equation of inertia is what almost
It's like the
everything is
genesis
based
of
on.
science.
It all springs from there. It's the only mathematical equation that has a
Write that
monument.
down.
Somewhere in Europe, there's a monument with that equation on it.
There's a monument in Europe with the equation on it?
Yeah, and the guy, and shoot, I can't remember the name of the scientist, the mathematician who developed it. So, from inertia, everything else springs.
It's the genesis.
But it's also one of those things, too. It's like we can see that inertia in all of our experiments and everything works still seems to be fact. But as we know in science, everything is a theory anyway.
Mm-hmm. But inertia.
So, yeah, so the
Proves
god
to
of
be
science
fact.
is inertia.
The god of science is inertia.
Yeah, the
I like
very
that.
base.
I'm gonna write that
So
down
sometimes
too.
I've been trying to take a look at inertia and just try to break it down, see how it relates to time and space.
And are you using your art then as a means to document that journey?
Yes, I also have a whiteboard where I actually do some equations, but it's pretty stupid stuff.
Do you have a whiteboard you do equations? That's stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's like a canvas,
Yeah.
You don't really know what you're doing or what you're... Unless you're doing like a photo, but if you're doing some kind of abstract art, then the goal is to not understand what you're doing. And I think the same could be said for equations, because those are symbols. Like, they're symbols
Right.
that represent things.
Yep.
That's what's fascinating to me about the physics and math sciences. Because I'm taking a statistics course right now, and it's actually kind of fun. Because you have to learn the language of those statistics. Like, those symbols mean things. And they just tell you what to do with the numbers.
Right.
And as long as you just understand that, you'll be able to understand what to do with numbers. So it's kind of cool. It's a relief from art school, actually. Because it's only one way to do that. There's no concepts or criticism or judgment, really.
It just is.
Yeah, I like it. So, we're at an hour and 45 minutes, man.
Okay.
Man, now I try to just keep it down to an hour, but this was a really interesting conversation. I was really glad you came over
Well,
to talk, dude.
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Do you have any advice? Well, I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this question,
Okay.
at least on the podcast. What do you think is the most important advice? What's some important advice you could give to me?
Advice?
Yeah, advice or inspiration for any creative person out there.
That that being creative should be play. And if you're going to look at it as work. So let me go in that opposite direction. There's advice that's given to a lot of artists that says you've got to work a lot, work hard. And what does that mean? How do you quantify working hard? One way to interpret that is do a lot of paintings, right? So paint a lot. If you're a writer, write a lot, read a lot, do what you like doing and do it a lot. Do it for free until you get paid. I think that was advice that Michener, the author, gave advice to a college class one time. But still, there's this aspect of work hard until that happens. And it is possible to find what that means, I've learned, from observation and watching artists who are in galleries. I'm not. I don't go the gallery route with my own work. But if you want to be in galleries, and that's how you define success, is by being in a gallery, then that quantifies that you have to be doing 12 to 24 pieces a year for each gallery that you want to be in. Because that's how much they're going to want to sell to be able to make a profit off of what you do. Which many times can be a way to approach a gallery, is that your artwork is profitable. Not like, isn't my artwork good? Because they don't really care sometimes. They don't, a good gallery owner might have his own taste, but many times will keep those opinions to themselves because it's really a matter of what do their clients want, what do they know they can sell. So work hard, your output has to be there for what you want to earn. And if you know that you can create so many a day or so many a month, you can adjust your pricing from that. I do strongly recommend that visual artists use a consistent pricing method and not price by what they like or how much time they put into something, but go with something simpler, like simply a per square inch. $1 a square inch, $2 a square inch.
I know that's a big issue, is how to price your work.
There's too many times I'm seeing shows here in town at some of the big places that have lots of artist studios, and I'm wondering how in the world did they price that compared to this one over here? And that's going to be confusing for a buyer. That, oh, you like this piece better? Do you mean this one that I really like you don't like as much? You know, it's like, I don't know if I want it then. You place more value on this one than that one.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
But if you can take that out of the commercial side, your own subjective opinion of the piece, it makes it a lot simpler for everybody to be more consistent.
I'm guilty of doing that. That makes a lot of sense.
So there's my two pieces of advice. You can get into how to price and keep your pricing consistent.
All right, man. Yeah, because I was like, I have these paintings that I like and I don't really want to get rid of.
That's okay.
And I argue that someone will have to pay a lot of money for that one if they want it. And then some I've given it away, given away just because, like, I don't really like it. So I'll have to consider that now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. But you don't... Okay, one more question.
Okay.
Why don't you want to display your work in galleries?
That's too much work.
Right? That's why I get...
No, well, to be perfectly honest, it is a lot of work.
You have to transport
I
them.
am very much involved in the community to do as many paintings as what it would take. For one thing, my output is slower. I take months to do one painting many times. I just do too much detail, which I got to change some. Last December, I was the artist in residence for Castleton United Methodist Church to do 4 paintings, one painting each week during their Advent. And I made them interactive payments where I got the congregation up to do some painting on them. And I did each painting in 2 hours during both services. Never done anything like that before. But it really worked. They're really cool paintings. They're on the website too. And I kind of learned I can loosen up. I don't have to be photorealistic all the time. So
But that's what you tend to gravitate towards, is the detail work.
Yeah, it's all for my grandmother's fault. When she could do such great detail, especially on the china that she painted, that my goal from being a little kid was to be able to paint in finer detail than what she could. So finally, as a young adult, I kind of realized, I've surpassed my grandmother now. But I also realize there are times I have to loosen up a little bit.
That takes work,
too.
doesn't it?
But if I'm going to do a person, for instance, and I have there's a lot of figurative quality to my work that I never realized until the passage of time. But, whether I do trees and people, I have to do them with what I consider an aspect of quality. I can do it, and so I should do it.
You want it to be beautiful.
I want it to be beautiful, right? It's very true.
Yeah, I think I was listening to a podcast today, and the gentleman hosting the podcast was talking about artists. He talks about artists a lot, and the aspect of beauty. And he was saying that artists, how did he put it? I'm terrible at especially when I'm having a conversation like this. I can't remember things, but he was saying that artists their goal is to develop representations of beauty. And I thought that was beautiful.
We're sharing a composition. We're creating a composition out of the world to communicate with everybody and to make understanding out of chaos.
Yeah. Understanding out of chaos. Yeah. All right. Well, Dan, thank you for coming on today.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Sounds like you are contributing quite a lot to the community and have throughout your life. I'll definitely have to read more about you, and I hope to see you more at artist gatherings. Do you usually attend the artist industry nights?
I slowed down after my best friend Ellie Siskine died earlier this year. We always went to First Fridays and a lot of cultural events, and it became harder to go by myself just to get out the door. But in the last few weeks, I've been getting better at it, and I've gone to some artist industry nights, and I've gotten to some gallery openings more recently, and plan to do more of that.
Okay.
As well as I'm still producing shows for RSA and our alumni group.
Yeah. Well, good, because I had the pleasure of meeting you at one of those events.
Yep.
So I'm grateful for that. So I hope to see you again.
That's right. Networking is great, especially for artists who are solitary to get out and meet other artists.
Hey, it was Constance that gave me that important advice. If there's any art happening going on, you got to show up, even if you don't want to. That's what inspired me to go.
All right.
Start going to more things, like even if it's just one thing a week or one thing a month.
I will tell you, since we're talking about Constance Scopolidis. A few years ago, she invited me to her studio. She wanted to have a meeting. Well, okay. And one of the first questions was, why aren't you in galleries?
It's just you and her?
Yeah. So she was getting on me that I don't market myself and my art the way I should. And she gave me magazines that I should be in, and even some galleries that I should be contacting out of state. And so I have my list. I still have that list, but I never did anything about it. Yeah. So I'm still just involved locally.
I get it. It's hard doing the gallery life. It's just a lot of work. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't want to put in the work. I don't want to... I'd rather just go to them.
There's actually a lot more opportunities nowadays with different sites, websites, and all to do business that galleries don't have the same role that they always used to.
That is a good point. Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you. Where can people find your work online? Or if they...
CooperFineArt.com.
CooperFineArt.com.
Right.
Are you on Facebook or any social media?
Yeah,
platforms?
I'm on all of them, but I don't like using them so much.
Okay.
I post once in a while, but not religiously.
Okay. All right, people, there you have it. Go check out
Fine art.
CooperFineArt.com. He has some really interesting work. I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. And if you did enjoy what you hear, please share with a friend and recommend the show if you know of anybody that may be interested. Thanks for coming on, Dan.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.